All right, and we are live. Welcome everybody to the Strength Connection podcast. Mitchell Osmond, good to meet you, man. Thanks for so much for coming by.
Well, hey, thanks for having me, Michael. I'm looking forward to having this conversation with you and your listeners today, man.
I am too. I've got a chance to dive into your work, specifically with your podcast, Dad Nation, which is awesome. Highly recommended to everybody here. So to kick off with, like, how do you introduce yourself, like at a like a party to people when they say, "Hey, what do you do?" Like, because you do a lot of different things from there. What's kind of your elevator pitch that you introduce yourself as?
I love that. No one's ever asked me that, man. Like, what is your actual pitch? But I'll try and give it to you, man. Well, like you said, my name is Mitchell Osmond, right? I'm the founder of Dad Nation. I'm a coach to high-performing men. And I'm also the host of the Dad Nation podcast, which you mentioned, which is ranked in the top 10% globally and has about 33,000 monthly listeners at the time of this recording. But the hard truth that I deal with is that all over the world, there are career-driven husbands and fathers who are checked out, stressed out, and burned out, so they're struggling, right? And so because of this, for example, this is an example here. We know that today in the United States, up to 90% of divorces that are initiated by the wives or the women in the relationship. And this is the kind of pain that I see every single day. So I help men reclaim their home, their health, and their happiness without sacrificing their career success, right? And so if you were to ask me, what's your mission? Well, I'm on a mission to help transform the lives of 500,000 men through media and mentorship. And so when I say media, I'm talking about the podcast. When I say mentorship, I'm talking about the coaching, the community, all that stuff, and help them show up as powerfully at work as they do at home. Does that make sense?
100%. Yeah, that's a great pitch. I think you got it nailed down right there. Yeah, I want to go into the work that you do with men, but I know this was also a very personal journey that you had to go through yourself. So I always like to hear the origins of how specifically people in coaching spaces come about to where they are now. So this was a spot where you saw yourself, out of shape, overweight, marital issues, debt. There was a lot of different things that were going on from there. How did your personal transformation kick in? Was it a specific moment where you really like saw that you needed to make a switch? Was it a slow burn process that you started working at? How did it work for you when you started making positive changes for yourself?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, man. And I think, well, people often ask me, what was your turning point? What was what was that tipping point? And for me, there was two, all right? There was a fight and a funeral, okay? So first one was the fight. Now, if you want to visualize with me, me and my wife were sitting on the couch, and one day, and it just all hit the fan, man. We started fighting over money, and that morphed into a fight about me not being present, which spiraled into a bunch of other things. But at this point, we had been married for about 3 years. And it was a hard 3 years of struggling, man. But this fight, this day, was our rock bottom. We said we would never use the word divorce, and today we did. And deep down, I knew that if something didn't change, this would all be over, and I'd lose everything. And to sort of spin it back a little bit more, I had recently been let go of a senior leadership position, especially you men listening. I mean, our careers mean a lot to us, right? It was my calling, it was my identity. I spiraled into depression, man. I was 60 pounds overweight. We were $100,000 in debt. I was medicating with alcohol and drugs to sort of cope with where I was at, man. And I was getting dangerously close to, divorce. And I was checked out, stressed out, and burned out, like I said in the elevator pitch, right? But here was the problem, man. I had seen success professionally. I could lead board meetings, I could cast vision, I could raise up teams, I could, all those different things. But why was it that I couldn't figure out my life personally, right? Why was it that I was so powerful at work, but powerless when I came home? And maybe your listeners can connect with that. But to skip it back even more, I come from a dysfunctional upbringing. I had a non-existent relationship with my father. Alcoholism, drugs, crime were littered throughout my family growing up, and I was kind of caught in the middle of it all. So I knew where I came from, but I knew I wanted something different, but I could feel myself getting pulled back into the trauma of my past, man. When I would yell, I could hear my dad's voice, in mine, his words in mine. And I knew I could be better, but I just didn't really know what to do or how to do it. And at times I felt like two different people, man. Like there was this duality that was kind of tearing me apart a little bit, right? Because I was like, how could I just show up so powerfully at work, but come home and not even know how to talk to my own wife? you know? And so that was the challenge I was in. And literally, bro, 7 days later, okay, the second point happened. I was at a funeral. And so I've always been a singer, musician, and I was asked to sing at the funeral of this wealthy man. He was a philanthropist. And after hearing of this man's incredible life and all of his accomplishments, I was sitting side stage getting ready to sing the last song. And I overheard the minister ask the congregation, he said, "Are you living a life worthy of imitation?" He said, "If you were to die tomorrow, would you be proud of the legacy that you left?" And Michael, for me, like I swear, there were 2,000 people in the room, but I swear he said that for me, because as I strapped on my guitar and I started trying to choke out the last lyrics of the song, I could barely get through it, because all I could think, man, was if this was my funeral, no one would be saying he inspired me to have a better marriage, or he inspired me to get into shape, or I wish I had his bank account, or whatever. They probably would have said at that point, "Man, he struggled a lot," and then it was over, and so for me, dude, that was the thing. Like, people tell stories at funerals because that's all they have left, and they tell stories, and those stories are filled with chapters. And my life at that point was, the first chapter was my childhood, and that was a sad one. The second chapter was my wedding, my marriage, and that was a struggle at that point. And so by the time I left the church that day, I was determined that I would rewrite my story and create new chapters every single day of the man, husband, and father that I want to be. I made the decision right there and then that I needed to die to the man that I was in order to become the man I knew I needed to be for my wife, for my family, all those different things. And so, honestly, Michael, the problem was I had it all backwards. I was aiming for the professional success. My life was a personal mess, and I woke up, that next day, and I was like, what's the point of this influence? What's the point in this power if I'm going to spend Christmas alone this year, sitting around the tree by myself when my family celebrates in another house? It got real, dude. And so what I started to do was I surrounded myself with men who my ceiling was their floor. You understand what I mean?
Yes.
Guys who were living where I wanted to go. And there were 5 men, and they surrounded me. They held me accountable. They showed me what was possible, not just because they gave me the steps, but they were actually in my circle. So I knew, well, if he can do it, I can do it, right? They called me up and held me to that standard that I said I wanted. And within 18 months, so about a year and a half, we paid off the 100 grand of debt. We completely restored our marriage. I had lost the 60 pounds, reclaimed my health. And I was clean, man, of substances and distractions, and I was focused. And that was the turning point, man. And from that point on, a lot of people started asking questions because I was in positions of leadership, and they're like, "Dude, what are you doing? Your life is on fire," in the best kind of way. And so I started helping friends of mine, just connecting with their wives, or getting out of debt, building budgets, and building fitness plans, and you name it. And one of my mentors said, "Mitch, if you really want to have an impact, you should start a podcast, right? And just share your principles with the world." And I heard a podcast by Ed Milet, and he said, "You are the most qualified to help the person you used to be." And when I heard that, I was like, dang, I need to do this. And so I launched the Dad Nation podcast, and within about a year, it became, globally rated top 10%. And then I had people listening all over North America, and they would start asking questions like, "Could you sell me a course? Could you coach me? Could you?" I was like, "Well, sure, I'll figure it out." And then I hired a coaching firm to help me, give me those skills. But at the end of the day, and then I launched the coaching. But that's all I do now, man, is I help the person I used to be. And I think that, going back to that funeral moment, are you living a life worthy of imitation? For me, now I know that one day when I draw my last breath, I can do it in peace, because I'll know that I lived a life worthy of imitation. And in my definition of that is a life dedicated to helping other men become better husbands, fathers, restore their relationships, and break these generational curses and cycles for themselves, man. So that's my story.
I love it, man. That's really powerful. A lot of different threads that I want to pull on this from here.
Pull away, man.
Yeah, the declaration is so powerful, right? From, the fight with your wife, and then the funeral, and they're like, that was a decisive moment. I think oftentimes, like, change comes like in a gradual way, but it usually does change in an instant when you finally declare and proclaim that. But looking back in retrospect, oftentimes, maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong, but like usually it's not the first time we have this self conversation with ourselves that I need to make a change. Like at this time, there's usually numerous times before that doesn't click, it doesn't catch. What what do you think it was about like that specific time that was like the moment? Do you have you thought about that like much before, like in retrospect of like what was it about this particular moment that finally now you were ready to make this change and then never look back and really not just make a change but make a transformation?
hmm Yeah, man. I think, I like to think that I'd like to say that I was super wise and emotionally aware, and I took those steps gradually, and I didn't, man. I waited until almost lost everything. I waited until my wife was about to walk out the door. And so for me, it was now or never. It was do this now or lose everything. And one of my mentors at the time, even when I reached out to him for help, and this guy was in the context of fitness, um, he had asked me a question that I ask people all the time, even still today, because I talked to him and I asked for help. And then as soon as he had the conversation with me, my ego showed up, and I'm like, yeah, well, like I got to lose some weight, but I mean, I'm fine. Like I can probably do it on my own. If I figure, I could probably figure it out on my own. And then he just said, and how's that working for you? Right? How is that
Powerful
working for you?
question. Yeah.
Yeah. How are your skills? How are your disciplines? How are your knowledge? How is your implementation working for you? And then he said to me, your life, whether you like it or not, your life today is a direct result of the decisions you've made over the last 3 to 5 years. It makes sense as to why you're here. And if you want to be somewhere different 3 to 5 years from now, then you need to learn how to think differently and make different decisions. Otherwise, you're going to wake up and do the exact same thing, because we know that 95% of the decisions that we make today are the exact same as the decisions we made yesterday. And this is what happened. We live on autopilot because only 5% of the decisions we make are ever different from the other 95. And so this is why we wake up a year later, 5 years later, 10 years later, and we're still stuck with the same food addiction. We're still stuck in a miserable marriage. We're still stuck in this traps of insecurity or anger, you name it. And so we don't ever draw a line in the sand and take ownership and say, if I don't do something different, nothing's going to change. And so I had to ask myself that question honestly. How is that working for me? How's my marriage working for me? How's my fitness working for me? Doing it on my own? Well, clearly it wasn't, right? And that at the end of the day, and that's why with me and my clients and my community, we start with honesty, the very, very beginning, because we're going to cut the BS, we're going to cut the lies, and we're going to get real and honest and open about where we're at, because that's really the plumb line, and that's where you know where to begin, right? So, for example, for me, every one of my clients do a eulogy exercise, and this is powerful. It's a little bit morbid, but it's visceral, because essentially what we do is say, hey, if you were to die tomorrow, okay, I want you to write your eulogy from the words of your wife. What would she say about you as she was standing over your casket? About the man, husband, father you are. Now we're going to write a version 2.0. Let's flash forward 3 years from now, and your marriage is on fire. You're in great shape. You're a man of your word. You're living 100% to your potential. What would she say then? Right? What would that eulogy look like? And let's compare the two. Because, Michael, in my experience, that is where the tension is. Who we are right now, the life that we're living right now, and the life that we know we could be living, or the man we know we could be, or the mother we know we could be, whatever, gender you are listening, apply it. Within that gap is where our attention and our frustration lies. This is the kind of stuff that keeps us awake at night, especially as high performers, because we go away to work and we build these big businesses, and we've got all this income, and we've got this professional success, but we come home and we're a personal mess. You know what I mean? And so that's, for me, that's where it all begins, is honesty. To answer your question, short story long, I had to get really honest with myself, and that's where I always begin.
Yeah. It was it Jason Wilson has a great line about that when he works with men of black belt in your personal dojo, but white belt in life on there. And
Yes.
it's such an interesting frame on that. Going into like now the declaration, the getting honest with yourself, and then you made all these transformations over that 18 months, from physical, from your marriage, from financial. Looking back, what was the most challenging one of those? Was it dropping the weight down, like taking care of yourself? Was it working on your relationship with your wife? Was it the financial side? Was one more challenging than the other, or was it like, did you try and keep a spotlight on all of them at the same time? What was that process like?
So that's a great question, Michael. I would say the greatest challenge I faced was my mind, right? Because everything in me continuously tried to sabotage. Everything in me tried to just implode my life because I didn't necessarily do the deep work first. And so I was trying to wrap band-aids around everything. I was looking for the new 75 hard, the keto, the intermittent fasting, and trying to lose weight, but I didn't actually assess my emotional relationship with food. And I kept trying these diets when in reality, I didn't actually believe that I was the kind of person who could be fit one day. And so I still fought that inner fat kid of like coming home and stuffing chocolate chip cookies down his throat because he had a bad day, which we can talk about. But I had this behavioral relationship or emotional relationship with food. That was the deep work that I didn't do in the relationship. I kept repeating the same mistakes of my father and his father and his father. Right? I inherited a great gift of a very quick temper. And so, but deep down, I didn't believe that I was worthy of love. I didn't believe that I was deserving of love. And so when I actually tried to receive the love, I would, I would sabotage because I didn't believe that I had never really experienced that great love. So I couldn't, if I never experienced it, I couldn't extend it. You understand what I mean? And so I had to heal from my past because I didn't know what that felt like as a kid. I'd never heard my dad say, I love you or I'm proud of you. That language didn't exist. And so I didn't know how to receive it. So therefore, I couldn't give it. And so I kept sabotaging relationships around me. Same thing with the finances. My parents were poor. Their parents were poor. And I just believed, well, you just carry debt. That's just what you do. You're not going to make any kind of significant income. That's not for people like me, you know? And so I had to do the deep work. And so I would say, man, I faced that. The mental battle was the hardest. And that's where the sense of this is where the community came in. And since then, I have actually created a framework around that's called the Iron Five. And all of my clients have 5 men that surround them. And they hold them accountable in these different areas because this was the key. I couldn't see it for myself. I couldn't see that I could be fit, that I could have a healthy marriage, that I could be financially free, all these different things. And so having these men that are no more than 1 degree of separation from me that I reached out to and I was connecting with regularly, just by proximity, I could see they were living this. So yeah, they could also give me the tools, but I could also say, well, I know them personally. So I know that that's probably possible for me too. And so when I doubted myself, not only did they call me up, but there was actually evidence in my life of people who were doing this. And this is why I think proximity is so key, because you can look to influencers and celebrities, but then when it doesn't work out, it's so easy for you to say, well, I'm just not them anyways. That's not my life, right? But if there are people in your life that you have a personal relationship with, well, that makes it different, right? And so for me, mindset, man, massive hurdle. And I had to do the deep work of like drilling down and eradicating those negative self-beliefs. And I'm happy to go there if you want, but at the end of the day, I had to stop putting band-aids on everything and actually get down to the wound, scrub it out and let it heal.
Yeah, let's dive into this a bit, because mental performance, it's something I work with my clients, but I've always had this question in my mind of when we say mindset, it's one of those words that we throw out so much, but nobody actually breaks down and dissects like what it actually like means to you. What are the practices to actually see success in it? So what I mean by that, Mitch, is like, if you want to get into a fitness program, it's a very easy objective thing to know if you're making progress. If you want to lose weight, is it dropping on the scale? Are you, seeing the visual changes? It's very easy to determine the success in there. Almost same thing with finances. If your debt's going down, like you can see the measurements. But when we're working on the mind and seeing like the changes and know I'm making progress on this, it can get very foggy. It can get very subjective in that. So when you are working on your mindset and your mental performance, what did that look like for you when you saw like, all right, this is starting to make progress. I'm seeing things differently. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, Though this is really, really good. So let me give you a framework that I use with my clients to help you assess this and sort of break free from some of those limiting self beliefs. Um, and then we can get into a real practical exercise that you can do. Does that sound okay? Okay. So, but before I go there, let's back it up a little bit. So, um, I think people get it wrong when we think about how our lives play out. Most people think, it goes past, present, or future, or past, present to future, right? We say, when we grow up as children, we say, well, I mean, the reality is that your environment shapes your attitude, right? So the environment you grow up in shapes how you see the world. Now, we grow up as adults and we continue to let our environment shape our attitude, who we're hanging out with, all that kind of stuff, and our family members and blah, blah, blah. But we need to understand that we get to flip the script and we can allow our attitude to shape our environment, change that narrative from our mouths, from our thoughts, and that gets to actually change the environments we get in, whether it's business environment, financial environment, marriage environment, you name it. And so I created a sort of an overall framework around this called the author's advantage. And really what we do is this is the idea of taking the pen back. Okay, and you're rewriting a new chapter. You're rewriting. So what we do, instead of going past, present, future, we flip that model on its head and we start with the future. And we get, I mean, this is not new. I mean, Napoleon Hill talked about begin with the end in mind all the time.
Yeah, Stephen
Stephen
Covey.
Covey.
Yep.
Yeah, and the chapter 2 is called Begin with the End in Mind. And so we start with the future and we say, what do we want our lives to look like? And then, for example, I didn't realize this, but my funeral moment was that. It was me beginning with the end in mind. What do you want to be known for? I mean, so many people don't even know the answer to that question. Or what do you want? 90% of my clients, successful men, cannot answer that question, right? And so we begin with the future and then we get a very clear picture as to what we want. And then we reverse that, engineer that into our present daily strategies and actions. But the kicker is then we move to our past and we speak to our past and we bring that into alignment with where we're going into the future, right? And so we make our past serve us, okay? Because our past usually sabotages us because we know that 80% of the way we see the world and the way we see ourselves is actually formed before we're 12 years old. That's why we have to look to the past and to see what happened, right? And so this framework I want to unpack with you is called the clear thinking process, okay? Now, CLEAR stands for CLEAR. It's the 5 steps in the process. And it's really a way of addressing these mental narratives that we have, right? And so I think that there are 5 common mental scripts that we all struggle with. And so if you're listening to this show today, or Michael, I want you to identify with any of these. Which of these 5 do you struggle with? I know I've struggled with all 5. So the first one is I'm not smart enough to fill in the blank. This is a scarcity script, right? The second one is it's too late to try something new, right? You think that you missed the moment, right? The third script is if I fill in the blank, this is what's going to happen. This is where you become a fortune teller, right? Which you're robbing yourself of the future because you don't know what you don't know, right? And then the fourth script is I don't have enough resources, money, time, fill in the blank. Again, it's another scarcity script. You think you don't have enough. Well, Tony Robbins says our generation's biggest need is not resources, but resourcefulness, right? You need to be resourceful and you can get those resources. And the fifth script is if I do blank, people will judge me. And this is the most insidious, right? Because this is where we let the fear of what other people would think dictate the decisions we make. And we give our power away to everyone else because our obsession with their thoughts actually end up controlling our lives and our decisions. So what we do then is we identify, some of those those lies we tell ourselves. So the first step in the process is C, right? So like I said, it's clear thinking. So call out the lie, number 1. What we have to do here is actually identify what that is that we're believing. So you might write down the story I'm telling myself about blank is, and then write it out. You might say that I'm just an angry man, or that I'm too far gone, or I've missed the moment, or I'm never going to be in shape, or, you name it. Now, it's not a truth, it's a tape, right? We need to hit stop on that because otherwise it'll just keep playing. And so we call it out. Second step is L, locate the source. Now, this is where we identify where this came from, right? We look to the past. So you might write the phrase, the people or situations that have started or reinforced this are, and you answer that, right? Now, it might be a high school bully, it might be a spouse, it might be a parent, a boss, you name it. But it's important that you name the source, because when you name the source, you can break its power. You understand what I mean? And then the third step is E, right? Evaluate the cost. Now, this is my favorite step. This is where we ask the question, what has living by this lie cost me? Does it cost my peace? Does it cost me my marriage, the respect, my confidence? And so you might write the phrase, the results I'm getting from telling myself this lie, or the results I'm getting by living by this lie are, and then you answer that, right? Now, it's important to feel the weight of this, not to shame you, but to get leverage to change it, okay? Now, the fourth step is A, right? Affirm the truth. Now, this is where we flip the script, okay? This is where we write a new statement that's more true than the other lie that you've been believing. And you might ask yourself in this step, what else could be more true than the story I'm telling myself, right? This forces you to get curious about where it came from and what could be true. So, for example, for me, I was always told, you're not the smart one, right? That's your older sister. You're going to be an alcoholic just like your dad. And so those were the narratives playing on in my head, right? And so my reinforcement statement was, I am an intellectual, I am of sober mind, and I have much to offer this world and those I love. And it was certainty-based language. It was present tense. Notice I didn't say, I hope to be an intellectual. I hope to be sober. I hope, it was like, no, this is who I am. So I affirmed the truth. And then the last step is where we get real tactical. This is where we don't just say it, but we live it. I know as a fitness guy, you're going to love this. But the fifth step is reinforce with action, right? So the question becomes, what's one action that you can take this week to prove this new belief to yourself, right? And that's the key. And so for me, when I was writing, I'm an intellectual, I have much to offer the world and those I love. But what does an intellectual person do? They read books. That's one thing. That's all I knew. So I'm like, okay, well, I should start reading. And for me, the ultimate step was to launch the podcast, because that was the ultimate test. Because if I believed that I didn't have anything to offer the world, well, I'd find out real quick if I launched the podcast and nobody listened. And so it was a bold, courageous step, but that was a really significant step to reinforce this new truth that I was writing with action to say, no, that's not who I am. I'm going to pull that past into alignment with where I'm going. So I'm going to launch this podcast. I'm going to actually start sharing this with the world. And so that clear thinking, right? So we got call out the lie, locate the source, evaluate the cost, affirm the truth, and reinforce with action. If you were to take that and actually work through it step by step with any of these limiting self-beliefs, this narrative that you tell yourself, man, you would be a different human being in just 3 months of getting real practical about that. And I'll finish it up with just this thought. I love this quote from Carl Jung. He says, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And this is what we do. We don't question the unconscious. We don't question these narratives. And we allow them to run our lives. And then we call it fate. Wow, this is just where I am. This is just what life gave me. No. You get to change the narrative. You can take the pen back, right? Does that make sense?
I love it. Yeah. One thing I always love is frameworks, because I think with the mental side of working on our performance and having a clear mind and a good mindset, whatever that means, that can be subjective in there, but it takes it from up here in the clouds of like, oh, like I need to have a good mindset, into actually breaking it down into steps, to take. And what I really liked about it, and I want to ask you about, the whole clear, concept, but the end of it is when you reinforce with action. And I think as men, it's very easy to always go right to action first, just be doing stuff. It's like, because sometimes we take our worth from the things that we're doing. So if we're always in motion, then it always feels like we're doing something, whether it's productive or not. You better just keep moving and just keep moving. But in the five here, from the call out, from the locate, from the evaluate, affirm, and reinforce,
Reinforce.
is there one that seems to jump out more with the people that you've worked with, that's the most challenging for people to focus on, or really, harp on and get? Is there anyone that feels like some people get stuck on it more often than others?
Yeah, it's by far the first step. Call it the lie, because it's so deeply rooted in the subconscious, right? That you have you like, especially as guys, we're so obsessed with doing, right? And this is why this works really well for men, because a masculine essence is about doing, a feminine essence is about being. And so women think much less about how they perform and how they execute. They think about who they are, how they're doing, all those different things, who they are as a woman, versus men. It's like, well, what do you do? And so we have a hard time wrestling with those, even being able to identify what we're believing and where it came from, right? And so let me tell you a little quick story with a client of mine, white collar guy, really successful. And I asked him the question, what do you want, in one of our first sessions? He said, well, I want an Audi R8. So that's a very odd thing. Like, I mean, it's a supercar, right? So, well, why do you want an R8? He was like, well, then people will know that I've been successful. Okay, well, you already have this really successful company. Why, so I'm like, well, why do you want people to know that you're successful? Well, then if they know that I'm successful, then they would know that I had a lot of money. I'm like, okay, well, why do you want people to know? So I'm going down through the layers, right? Why do you want people to know that you've got a lot of money? And he said, well, if I got a lot of money, then people will respect me. And I said, ding, ding, ding. You are feeling disrespected somewhere in your life, and you're craving respect. So you think if people know that you have money, and that allows you to be successful, allows you to buy that car, then you think that they'll respect you then. Well, where in your life have you felt disrespected? Where in your life have you felt incompetent? Because those are man's two greatest needs: to feel respected and to feel competent. And so he didn't want an R8. He wanted to feel respected. And as we dug down deeper and deeper and deeper, it came from his father, right? And his father made a lot of money, and he gave him a hard time because he never really didn't have the same business acumen, or he wasn't business savvy. And he favored the other kids instead of him. And so he always felt like he was worthless. And so when he grew up, and then he was being a little bit disrespected in his marriage because he wasn't loving his wife, and she started disrespecting him. And so he felt this insatiable appetite to get the respect of everybody. And the only way he knew how was how his dad did it, by buying things, right? And so that's how we had to drill down. And that's why it's so hard, because all guys can think is do, results, results, results. Well, what is the result of being respected? Well, he was just jumping 5 steps and getting a supercar. You understand what I'm saying?
100%. Yeah. Well, it's like, it's an easy objective thing that you can point to and say, see, that's it. I have that right there. And
exactly.
But I mean, usually the path down that is, once the R8's in there, well, then you need to get, the 911 afterwards, because that's what the next guy did. It's American Psycho with the business cards all over again, in a much more realistic, sense that's going on in here. So, with the Iron Five that you said, with surrounding yourself with people and community, I think this is so powerful to, not going at it alone is something that I've, learned many ways the hard way myself, of, having to have good people around me and support. When you go into your Iron Five, or surrounding yourself with your people, you had your mentors that you surrounded yourself with that helped you on this journey. What was it about this group of men that really helped you? Like, they held you accountable, but was it something else that they that they showed you? Was it like, was it, support? Was it, was it calming, or was it like, what was that process like of working with that, group of men on the beginning of your journey?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, Michael. I'll tell you what it was like for me, and then I'll walk you through the framework for your listeners if they want to like actually adopt their own Iron Five. Is that okay? Okay, cool. So for me, dude, all I did is I didn't know what I was doing at the time, but now I realize what the significance of what I was doing. But I literally just looked around my life. I saw, and when I became aware of the areas I needed to grow in my marriage, in my fitness, in my finances, in my mental health, and in my spirituality, I legitimately, man, just thought about, okay, who in my life has the best marriage I know? Who in my life has the most money I know? Who in my life is the most jacked? And I just started reaching out to these guys and I said, hey, would you be willing to like, just like once a month, man, can I buy you a beer or grab a coffee or whatever? And would you be willing to just sit down and just tell me like a little bit more about how you were able to do this? How are you so successful in business? Or how do you love your wife? Or how did you lose the weight? And when you humbly approach someone, the answer is usually always yes, because here's why. We hesitate, especially as men, because we think that we're going to be a burden, or we don't want to be rejected, or we don't have the humility. We don't want to look weak.
It's
But I tell
vulnerable.
you
Yeah.
what, exactly. But I tell the guys this all the time. I'm like, and I'll ask them, and if you're a listener today, I mean, has anyone ever approached you and said, and asked for your advice on something, or asked for your help with something, in an area particularly that you were successful? And every single time they're like, yeah, of course. I remember when that happened. So how did that make you feel? And it's always, oh, it was really nice. It was actually kind of flattering or humbling. I said, well, did you help them? I'm like, yeah. I said, would you have even actually moved things around your schedule so that you could help that person? And most of the time they're like, yeah. So I said, well, what makes you think that you would be any different than any of those people? Because here's the thing. Anyone ahead of you knows how difficult it is to get to where you're going. They will never give you a hard time or give you crap about it. The only people that will do that are people that are behind you. And they'll keep pulling you down like crabs in a bucket. But I tell you what, those people don't matter because they're not going to be where you're going. You understand what I mean? And so don't allow that fear of failure or fear of judgment, right? That mental script. Don't give other people that power. Take the power back and have the humility to reach out to those people, because they're just going to do nothing but give you credit and admire you for reaching out, right? And so that's what I would encourage you with today. Don't hesitate, especially if you're a man, because this is, the wolf. We all we know this lone wolf mentality, right? The lone wolf dies alone. Strong wolves build packs. And so this is so important. So let me walk you through the Iron Five really principle here real quick. And you can think through this. Now, it wasn't this nuanced. Of course, when I did it, it was all kind of grassroots and organic. I was reaching out. I was pulling at straws, basically. But the 5 people that I'd have you consider they're all P's, because I'm a psycho like that and I like alliteration. But the first one is the partner. Okay, this is the one that walks beside you. This is the guy with you in the trenches. He knows your wins. He knows your wounds. You don't have to wear a mask with him. Okay. The second one is the protector. This is the guy that watches your blind spots. He's the guy who sees what you miss. He calls out your patterns, the stuff that will take you out if it's left unchecked. He's not really impressed by you, okay? But he's invested in you. He's protecting you. The third one is the provider, okay? This is the guy that invests in your growth. He's the mentor. He's the coach. Maybe he's the father figure in your life, right? This is someone who's been where you want to go and is willing to open doors and let you get there, right? The fourth one is the pusher. This one's key. This is the guy that demands your best. And this is the guy that won't let you coast. And this is the most uncomfortable relationship, because he's going to pull you out of your comfort zone constantly. And he reminds you of who you said you wanted to be, right? And then the fifth one is the pioneer. This is the guy that shows you what's possible. When I said, these guys, my ceiling was their floor, this is who I'm talking about. The pioneer. He's ahead of you. He's living the life that you're dreaming of. right? He is the example that expands your vision of what is possible. And his wins remind you of your ceiling and how you can actually break through it, right? And so those are the five. And my encouragement to my clients is like, hey, get some version of these five guys around you. If you do, man, and you hold yourself accountable to them, you'll be unstoppable.
Yeah. Yeah, I gotta say, like, I love the frameworks and the work of personal growth that we can do. But from what you just said there, I think that actually is my favorite thing of that, because it's, in the space where we can get so much information. I mean, we're on a podcast right now. People are listening in there. They're probably doing it for themselves, but it's so crazy how far you can get by just finding someone that you can sit down with and have a coffee, who's been where you want to go, and what they'll teach you, and that connection that they can bring. I remember one of the great lessons I learned on this podcast was from Shane Farmer, who founded Dark Horse Rowing. It's a rowing company. And he said that when he was young, he had no idea what he wanted to do, like with college. And he just started going into like his parents' Rolodex of people who did different stuff, and just like insurance people, people who were in house cleaning, in fitness, all this stuff, and just like, hey, can I buy you a coffee? I just want to know what you do. We think that we don't want to be a burden, but there's actually a study out there that like people like you more if you ask them for a favor rather than if they do you a favor or so. So it's like, if you say like, hey, like, would you do me a favor? And like you actually ask for their help, they actually like you more in many ways from there. So,
Mm-hmm.
and as you said that, it's like how many people have asked me over the years, like, hey, can I ask you something, or can you help me with this? You are pretty quick to like throw down your stuff and be like, sure, what you got? Like, how can I help you? Because we want to be useful. Everybody wants to be useful. And specifically people who have been down that road, and somebody's asking them how to be more like that because they've been down that path before, usually those people are very open to connect with you.
100%. And that's, at the end of the day, we're all asking ourselves that, what do we want to be known for at the end of the day? Now, a lot of us don't consciously ask ourselves that question, but nobody wants to live a selfish life. It doesn't even feel good. We know at the end of the day, service, especially as men, man, if we can serve people, help lift them up, empower them, man, that is a life worthy of imitation. And so that's why I dedicated my life to all this. Because if I was like, the only way I know how to take this trash and turn it into treasure is by flipping my story and using it to serve other men and lift them up too, and help them see this transformation in their marriages and their mindset, and their fitness and all those different areas. And it just feels good. And so, but that's the challenging thing, is you got to get over that hurdle of the pride and the ego, and be like, you know what? People just want to help genuinely. But as long as we don't do that, we keep giving our power away to the other people because we're afraid of what they're going to think, and it's like, those people are going to continue to shape your future until you take it back and you say, no, I'm going to actually exercise some humility. I'm going to eat a slice of humble pie. I'm going to have this conversation with this guy that I respect and admire, and say, hey, you're better at this than me. Would you help me? That's powerful, dude.
Yeah. So now, I mean, with Dad Nation podcast, you've built a community where, tens of thousands of men are listening to you. And I'm sure it's built over time from there. But what do you think it is about your particular message that's resonating so much with men? There's a lot of different programs out there that talk about men's health and work. There's a lot of alpha based things that are out there of going in. From talking to you, I know you're not one of those guys in there. Like, it's a much different approach. What do you think it is that like is resonating so much? Have you broke it down? Do you think that through, much, or do you just kind of like keep your head down and keep doing what you feel's most best? What's that process like for you?
Yeah, man. It's so good. I think there is a middle ground here that there are not a lot of people playing in. I think men today are more confused than ever about their role at home, right? About their role as a husband, as their role as a father. Bro, you can't even say the word masculinity without getting canceled these days, right? And so it's a tricky place. And I think a lot of guys don't even know how to articulate what that looks like, let alone actually step into that. And so the problem is we all have this lack of clarity. We all struggle in a lot of different ways with insecurity and challenges. But there's really kind of two camps that are they're really loud voices. There's the red pill, the ultra alpha, guys who the Andrew Tates, the whatever, who is just, I mean, it's just not my flavor, man. I don't, I mean, think what you want, whatever. We can all think what we want, but it's just ultra aggressive, and it's not appealing to men or women. It might be appealing to men, but certainly not any woman I've ever met. And then you got the other side, which is pretty soft, that says, masculinity needs to look more like femininity. And that the other side of the camp is like, well, there is no such thing, or we don't need men, or it's not, we don't have anything valuable to bring, And so there's these two camps that are really loud in our world today, and I think there's not many people in the middle what I would say have a good understanding of what modern masculinity looks like, right? That can speak to how to live in that tension and live well. And I think the few who are doing it are reaching these men who really need the most help. And the guys that can define that, I think, are doing well, because that's the tricky part. We're not taking this dated narrative from the 40s and 50s of masculinity, but we're also not taking what we're hearing today in media, because that's garbage too. We're finding a sweet spot. Can you be dangerous? Can you be strong? Can you be, what I love the phrase, easy to love, hard to kill. Are you the kind of person who's capable of violence and protecting your family if you need to, but at the same time can create space for your wife and is confident enough to hold space for your children's emotions and to sit down and be fully present and to be fully in tune with them and have the humility to be vulnerable and honest and apologize and be in the room with them. So there's that balance, and I think is required of us as modern men. And there's not a lot of people who understand how to live in that, and they don't talk about it a lot. But for me, that's the sweet spot, is like having that assertiveness, that confidence, the decision making ability, the strength, you name it, of that more traditional masculinity, but the more modern emotional intelligence, the humility, the vulnerability to say, I can apologize. It's okay for me to be weak in this moment. It's okay for me to say I'm feeling anxious about this thing, or to sit with my wife and actually hold space for her and have her talk about something, and you not shove a strategy down her throat, or not be so insecure that you can't hear her negative feedback without getting defensive. It's that emotional awareness, that emotional intelligence that I think men miss these days. And so, to answer your question, I think there is that sweet spot, and I like to think that I'm learning how to play in that middle ground. And I think it's giving language to men that don't have that language, and they're like, "Oh, that's what I've been feeling," and I didn't understand it until I talked to you. Does that make sense?
100%. Yeah. Well, because I think, you know, the extremes are easy, and I can see why it's people fall into that, because it's a very easy path to thinking, because you really don't need to think. It's like, this is the checkbox that you believe in, and you don't have to do any extra self work to really see what you believe on either side of it. It's like, oh no, this is it, and you check all these boxes. I don't have to do any more work. I've got that part of life solved right there. When in reality, most people, I would actually probably, say all people, we dabble somewhere in the middle zone from there. And it comes down, I mean, Lao Tzu talked about this in the Tao Te Ching 2,500 years ago with the yin and yang. Like, we all have a little bit of white, a little bit of black with the little balls, in between on that side. But I think what I like about what you're doing is, these things are not easy to purse out and just have a very easy, like, this is what it is. Like, this takes personal work to do. The definition of success is a very subjective thing. Like, yes, you want to have certain things on finances, on physical health and there's some biomarkers to get in there. But once you get that, like, yours might be at 60%, while mine might be at 40% on some things or so. But it takes work to get in there. And that's why I think it's confusing for a lot of people. But I think by having just an authentic conversation about it and just chatting about it, that's where you can find it. But it's never going to be like exactly pinpoint, right? It's kind of like mindset. You're never going to get to a day where you just fully arrive. It's like fitness. You're never just get in shape and now you're in shape. It's you have to stay in shape afterwards. It's the same thing of what we're talking about, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. And man, there's so much to unpack there, but I agree 100%. And, when you think about the confusion, around this masculinity piece, I actually did a big episode on this on the podcast, episode 55. And I talk about the big masculine mistake that actually kills desire and respect in your marriage. And this is what happens. We don't necessarily understand our role. And so we think we either got to be in a black box or a white box. We don't know how to live in the gray. And what happens is we don't show up powerfully as a husband, as a father. We don't take leadership, and that's actually kind of unattractive to our wives, to our partners. But yet we don't necessarily talk about what happens when that happens, when we lose the respect of our wife. But the thing is when you start to lose respect, attraction usually comes right after. And so what I'm talking about is polarity, is the difference between a masculine and the feminine, or a man and a woman. And so when that polarity gets reversed, when a man stops stepping in as a husband, as a strong leader, what happens is the wife, the mother steps into that role. And she begins to resent and disrespect her husband, because now she's stepping into the masculine as well. And she's being both the father and the mother. And so then what happens is the father or the husband feels useless. And then he feels incompetent. And what did I say? That's one of the two needs that every man has. And so we begin to shrivel and cower, because we don't know where we fit in our home anymore. And we also can't measure success like we can at work, right? Because we go to work and we get performance bonuses, we get, we close new contracts. We can see success all day at work. But how do you measure success when you get home? It's so intangible. And so we don't know how. We can't fix it with a strategy. Like when you come home, your son, your 6-year-old's not going to be like, "Hey, Daddy, here are 5 strategic reasons why you're an effective father." Like it's never going to happen, right? And so we don't know where we fit sometimes. And so the wife steps in, and she does both roles, and then it just sort of it fizzles, and attraction dies, respect dies, and before you know it, you become roommates, or your wife starts treating you like you're, like the third child in the family, or your wife becomes your mom, as I would say it, right? This happens all the time. And it happens because we don't know where we belong as masculine men in the world today, right? It's huge.
Mitch, dude, this has been a blast. I really enjoyed this conversation and the work that you're doing. Just from the frameworks that you've put together and just your outlook and your experience that you've put in this. I know you've put the work in on yourself as well as your community here. So I really appreciate you taking the time today.
Thank you, Michael. Listen, it was a pleasure to be here, and I want to leave your listeners just with one quick quote that's been resonating with me, and that is, "Time is the only currency that we spend without knowing the remaining balance." And so we don't know how much time we have. I could have 60 minutes or 60 years. And so to you, to your listeners, thank you for sharing this valuable asset, which is your time with me today. And I hope that I've added value to you and enriched your day today. So thank you for having me on the show, brother.
No doubt, brother. If people want to check out more of what you got going on, your spaces, your platforms, what's the best place that they can go to?
Oh, good question. Thank you for asking. I'd love to give your listeners a free gift today, because we talked a lot about, the emotional piece with men and all that stuff and how we wrestle. I have a gift called the Connection Code, okay, which is 50 questions that are designed to spark the fun and bring the fire back. Okay, we cover in this PDF. You're going to get questions about the fun, your fun, your leisure, passion, intimacy, purpose, you name it. And these are questions that will help you connect with your partner on a deep level emotionally. Because like I shared about these statistics earlier in the divorce statistics, 80% of the time these divorces are initiated because the wife doesn't feel connected emotionally with her husband. And so this is a tool that you can use. So whether it is you go out on a date or you put the kids down, pour up a glass of wine, the only rule is you can only ask her questions off this code, off this list. Totally free for you. If you go to dadnationcode.com/code, or Michael, I'll give it to you if you could put it in the show notes. But download it for free as a gift for me to say thank you. But lastly, how to get a hold of me? Yeah, if you could just honestly, you could just Google Dad Nation. You'll see my face plastered everywhere. But I got the Dad Nation podcast and the Instagram channel. You could hit me up there and be happy to connect about how I can serve you. Whether it is you just want to listen to the podcast and take it in, or you want to actually look at what it looks like to join the community or be coached by me, I'm happy to talk about that too. But either way, I just want you to find your tribe, to get plugged in, and to level up, not just for you, but for your family and for your children, and your generations to come, man. So
Awesome. Guys, check the show notes on all of those there. We'll put them in there. Appreciate the gift. Thank you so much, Mitchell. Listeners, thank you so much. We'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace.